saw you when I was running past you. Yeah. Only if it's slip and slide. Well, subcommittee come to order. Good morning and welcome everyone to today's hearing. Our primary goal this morning is to examine the Department of Agriculture's fiscal 2017 budget while also reviewing the use of funds past and present. I'd like to welcome our witnesses that are here with us this morning. Secretary of Agriculture, Honorable Tom Vilsack, thank you for being here. He is also joined by Chief Economist for USDA, Dr. Robert Johansson. Thank you for your presence, and also USDA's Budget Director, Mr. Mike Young. So good to have you. Good to have you all back today. This year marks the final year of the Obama administration's last budget request. Like any administration, we've seen a number of highs and lows. All in all, you and your team have a positive record, and you have reached quite a few milestones during the past 7 years. On the plus side, we can appreciate new discoveries made through agricultural research, record trade levels, expansion and restoration of critical rural infrastructure, a helping hand given to the impoverished and to farmers, ranchers, and producers hit with temporary crop and revenue losses, and the implementation of 2 farm bills. On the flip side, the subcommittee's work will extend well beyond the current administration. We are forced to look at how we can help fix critical programs that still need more attention, such as the rental assistance program that serves a vulnerable population, including the elderly and the disabled, the critical IT infrastructure projects still needed by our farmers that's commonly known as MIDAS, more effective and sensible regulations where necessary, a better understanding of obesity, how to get consumers to voluntarily change their behavior, investments in critical infrastructure that get the greatest return on investments and create more jobs, and in general, spending bills that are fiscally responsible, reflecting the needs of our federal government and the American people, while at the same time protecting the future of American agriculture. Basically, I have 4 primary goals for this subcommittee as we move forward on the 2017 appropriations process. The first goal is to increase oversight, improve efficiency, and demand more effective outcomes for the agency and programs that are within our purview. We will continue to build upon the oversight efforts of previous years. The ultimate goal is to prove the agency's accountability of the taxpayer dollar with a focus on results. USDA must tighten control for areas subject to large expenditures with unclear results and where performance tasks or milestones have not been met, such as is often the case with information technology investments. The second goal is to ensure the proper alignment of funds with core programs and services so that we can keep rural America vibrant. We appreciate the Department's keen attention to supporting rural America. There are a wide range of programs in our bill that seek to support the diverse rural communities across the United States, especially those that are vital to farmers, ranchers, and producers. I want to be sure that we make wise decisions in allocating the funds. Parts of rural America are really hurting. A few examples. The U.S. net farm income is forecast to decline for the third consecutive year in 2016. Secondly, about 2 out of 3 rural counties lost population between 2010 and 2014. And number 3, poverty remains high. And fourthly, midway through last year, rural employment was still 3.2% below its pre-recession peak in 2007. Many of us on this subcommittee know firsthand that supporting rural America is a wise investment in the future of this nation. The third goal for the subcommittee is to provide continued support for American farmers, ranchers, and producers in both domestic and the international markets. We will continue to provide the funds necessary to promote the U.S. agriculture within free and fair markets covering all from the beginning farmer and rancher to cooperatives representing the many sectors of agriculture. As you well know, Mr. Secretary, the United States has one of the most highly productive food and agricultural sectors in the world, and the U.S. government plays a unique role in ensuring the sector's vitality. Agricultural exports play a crucial part in the U.S. economy, supporting more than 1 million jobs and increasing revenue for our farmers and also for our ranchers. The fourth goal for the subcommittee is to protect the health of our people, plants, and animals. First and foremost, we will support food safety and nutrition research for the U.S. consumer. Livestock also needs to be healthy. As you're well aware, last year we saw the devastating loss of nearly 50 million birds due to an outbreak of the high-path avian influenza, costing the economy well over $1 billion between the public and private sector. Undergirding these efforts is intramural and extramural research. Lastly, we must support the men and women in the field who fight plant pests and disease that are on the front line. The purpose of this subcommittee is to meet these goals in a physically responsible manner that optimizes the resources we have while ensuring that prosperity for future generation. It's somewhat concerning that USDA's budget request includes increases for discretionary and mandatory programs that appear to disregard the debt crisis facing our nation. Total program level resources for USDA have gone from $175.8 billion in FY09 to $225.4 billion in the President's FY17 request. Our government is in debt more than $19 trillion, as we all know. And as they say, we need to cut up a few credit cards and not sign up for any new ones. The Department is again proposing to establish new programs and offices using scarce discretionary resources. While many of the programs that you identify in the FY17 budget need to be addressed, I believe that we should consider using the tools already available in the toolkit and not necessarily create new programs. The administration proposed new mandatory programs outside of the 2014 Farm Bill and the ongoing child nutrition reauthorization process that will not be supported by the FY 2017 appropriation. For example, your budget proposes $20 million in funding for an entirely new program called the Home Visits for Remote Areas. There are already 2 programs at HHS that serve this purpose. First being the Health Resources and Services Administration's Maternal, Infant, and Elderly Childhood Home Visiting Program, and second, the Administration for Children and Families Tribal Home Visiting Program. Not only does HHS have 2 similar programs, but USDA has a $68 million program called the Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program in every state and territory serving the very same populations. The calculations for this final budget become more complex as these increases are often are offset by questionable decreases, such as large reductions attributed to operating efficiencies. The savings are justified by a few nebulous sentences that cite decreased travel, fuel, printing costs that will, at the end, yield large savings. However, these savings have been claimed by the agency in previous years and are not likely to produce the amounts that are suggested in the budget request. There are programs within USDA's request that remain high priorities, such as discretionary funds for AFRI research, support for rural development and farm program loans and grants, crop protection and pest management programs, the rental assistance program, and other such vital agriculture and rural development programs. Let me add, I'm especially concerned about the major changes that are proposed to the crop insurance program. We just had this fight last fall, and Congress did the right thing in the end by maintaining the safety net that was established in the 2014 Farm Bill. Farmers will likely endure an estimated drop in net farm income of 56% from its recent high of $123.3 billion in 2013, and if realized, would be the lowest since 2002 in both real and nominal terms. They are experiencing tough economic times with sharply decreasing crop prices and a number of natural disasters. There are a number of uncertain economic factors in the future, yet USDA is proposing to reduce crop insurance by $16.9 billion over 10 years and make it increasingly difficult for them to secure funding. I join with my fellow colleague Mike Conaway, who chairs the Ag Authorizing Committee, in requesting that we do not adversely change the rules on the Farm Bill, of the Farm Bill. Chairman Rogers believes that Congress should abide by the budget caps that are set in place by the Bipartisan Budget Act of 2015, a total of $1.070 trillion in discretionary spending. With ever more competing needs, I anticipate that the subcommittee's funding level will remain relatively flat at best. USDA's budget request largely exceeds the FY16 enacted funding levels. Today, in the months ahead, we must analyze the request and focus on allocating the funding using the goals that I've outlined to the most effective, highest priority programs. So with that, for that little bit lengthy opening statement, thanks for bearing with me, but I'd like at this time to recognize our very distinguished ranking member, Mr. Farr from California, for any opening remarks that he may have. Mr. Farr.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and welcome for your 8th time before this committee. I just personally want to thank you for your public service. I admire you in public service as much as anybody I've ever served with, because I look at the department you're running, created by Abraham Lincoln to essentially protect the rural America, to discover it, to help people live in, as we made the westward expansion of essentially being the home ec department of how do you live in a rural area, how do you create rural water, rural housing, how do you hunt, how do you cook, how do you do all these things that needed to sort of move the westward expansion in a successful way. And the department has always been sort of in charge of rural America. And in rural America today, we have more poverty than any place else. And as someone with a background, an orphan, got a good education, became a lawyer, mayor of a small town, state legislator, governor, and a secretary of the agency that really is America's poverty agency, because your agency is the one that's responsible for making sure that all those unmet needs are the last mile, as they say. So I'm appreciating, and also really appreciate your ability to sustain yourself. I guess you're the only secretary that has survived all 8 years. And I'm going to go into some of the comments about some things that I'm interested in, but I also would hope that, Mr. Chairman, perhaps the last thing we could do is, because it's probably the last time that I'll certainly see you here and the secretary here, is to tell us what he's learned from being a secretary of 8 years in this cabinet. things that we might help us in the years out. But I would also thank you. I think your budgets have come in balanced and responsible, and in fact, I'm really excited of how you've targeted rural poverty. You are the president's sort of czar, can't use that word anymore, but the person in charge of all the poverty program, look at the poverty picture more in a big way rather than just in a siloed way within one department or another, but look at the whole picture. As I understand it, Mr. Chairman, this budget is coming in $300 million less than what we enacted last year on the discretionary side. And I'm a little concerned about why we're cutting it. Well, we'll find out. But I also would like to thank you because you've done something a lot of my growers, and particularly in California, rice growers, grape growers, wine grape folks, are really interested in doing trade with Cuba. And you took the bold action of taking members of Congress to Cuba, opening up a foreign attaché service in our embassy there, our newly opened embassy, and I really respect that, and I'm glad you've taken the leadership to do that. We have over 100 crops in just my county alone. You've seen those. We have a $4.8 billion ag industry, and those crops are certainly more than we can consume locally, and we're looking for as many markets as possible, and I think you've done a great job in helping us get access to those new markets. And I've supported your trade bills as well. Speaking of the Southern Hemisphere, many members of this committee are probably tired of hearing, but I was a Peace Corps volunteer in the early 60s. One of the first to go to Colombia. I lived in a very very large barrio in a city called Medellin, which nobody had ever heard of then. There wasn't a country with drug problems or anything, but it was certainly a country full of poverty. And when you live in poverty, you realize that people in poverty have no choices. You are so poor, you don't have a choice of what clothes you're going to put on. You don't have choice of what meals what you're going to eat at a meal. It's the same thing every single day. You don't have access to health care. You're sick or broken leg, it doesn't get fixed. You die if you're a young kid. And then they bring the baby to your door and want to borrow money to bury it properly. And so, my first month in Colombia, I saw more things that I'd never imagined that I would have seen and lived with. But one of the things you learn about poverty is that people they don't have a choice because they don't have the ability when they can't read and write to get a job. They don't, if they don't have access to food, it's starvation. It's how do you seek that? And I think sometimes we think because America, we do a good job of sort of covering up poverty. We have access to clothes. You can choose what you want to wear because there's a lot of giveaway programs in our churches for clothing and so on like that. We do have an extensive feeding program, so you get access to food. You have choices. But at the same time, we don't realize that the mentality, that culture of poverty, is just like it is in other parts of the world. And that's why I really appreciate your zeroing in, particularly from your rural background in Iowa, about the need to reach out and get every single child a start. Because if you have a chance, if you have a safe place to live, you have access to education, and you have some food that you can eat, and you have a nutrition so that you're not hungry in school, that you can learn. And, all those things that this department does, if you have those things, you got a chance, and a good chance in America. And you're a model of that chance. So I really appreciate that you're looking at how we revitalize the war on poverty. We spent a lot of money on it, and what I've heard from you, that it hasn't fixed the problem. So I'm glad that this budget maintains the SNAP program, the WIC program, the summer EBT program for children, and that these are basic food programs that help lift people out of hunger, out of food insecurity, and can focus themselves then on other life-enhancing activities. So these safety net programs, I hope, will never slip, and would love to hear your opinions on how we can better meet that goal.
Thank you, Mr. Farr. Also, we've been joined by the chairman of the Full Appropriations Committee, Chairman Rogers, and I'd like to recognize him at this time for any comments he'd like to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary, gentlemen, ladies, welcome. We appreciate your being here. Let me start off, Mr. Secretary, by thanking USDA for its tremendous work to help farmers and rural communities in my region and across the country. Of course, as you know, because you've been there, in eastern Kentucky, we are working on a regional community development initiative known as SOAR, Shaping Our Appalachian Region. Since the beginning of that group 2 years ago, USDA programs such as the Rural Development Community Facilities Loan Program and the Business and Industry Guarantee Loan Program have played an important role in retaining existing businesses and building new ones. Also, note your continued support for the single-family direct loan program. I was pleased to see the budget proposal maintained level funding for that program, which helps many of the poorest in rural America achieve their dream of owning a home. The equity rural families build in their homes can be used to create financial stability for generations to come. In addition, Mr. Secretary, you've also recently taken on a new responsibility, I think of very critical importance, having been appointed by President Obama to lead an effort to address the problem of heroin and other opiate use in rural communities. As you are aware, I'm sure, my district has felt the scourge of prescription drug abuse for more than a decade. I look forward to having another warrior on the battlefield as we continue to fight to save lives. I also want to express my sincere gratitude to you for agreeing to speak on this issue at the 5th Annual National Prescription Drug Abuse and Heroin Summit in March in Atlanta. Those are the good news things I wanted to mention to you. There are a couple of things that I'm not too happy about. In a year when we're going to be faced with some really tough decisions about where to spend money, very, very limited money, and not, it's difficult to understand why the administration has proposed funding such a large number of new discretionary programs. We're having trouble funding the ones that already are here and are working. Many of these new programs, such as the Rural Core and the home visits for remote areas, seem to me to be duplicative of programs already offered by USDA. With so many successful programs already struggling with tight budgets, it seems to me that now's not the time to be muddying the waters with additional initiatives. Another disappointment in the budget request is the reduction in the Business and Industry Loan Authorization. That program guarantees loans for rural businesses, which allows private lenders to provide more affordable financing for companies in rural areas. This program has helped create new jobs in my region by helping companies secure the financing they need to establish, expand, or modernize rural businesses. I hope you will shed some light on your intentions in reducing that loan authorization as you appear with us today. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here with us. Thank you for coming to my district several times and being very helpful in our efforts to help the people in eastern Kentucky. Thank you. Yield back.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. As has been said, Mr. Secretary, we do appreciate your service, not only to the Department of Agriculture, but also your service, public service in general. So we do appreciate your service and also being here. Without objection, your entire written testimony will be included in the record, and at this time would like to recognize you for your opening statement and your comments, and then we'll proceed with the questions. So, Secretary Vilsack.
Well, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today, and I want to thank you and Chairman Rogers and Ranking Member Farr for your comments today and for the courtesies that you've extended to me and to the Department throughout the time I have been Secretary. Been proud of the work we've done at USDA and will continue to be proud so long as I have this job. Representative Farr asked for me to opine about what I've learned in this job, and one thing I've learned is that my opening statement has very little influence on the budget. I will try to be concise and focus really on the future, and particularly 4 items in our budget, 3 of which this committee will deal with, 1 of which is outside of this committee's jurisdiction, but incredibly important to the future of rural America and our natural resources. I would sincerely hope that this committee would take very seriously the request that we've made to have a physical presence in Cuba. The opportunity for us to have individuals in Cuba to set the stage for resumption of trade is critically important because there are a number of preliminary matters that have to be addressed before trade can be reopened. Before the embargo is lifted, it would be helpful, in my view, for us to be able to deal with the technical aspects of a resumed trade relationship. This is a market that American agriculture should dominate. It currently does not, for many reasons. But one of the reasons is that we simply do not have anyone there promoting American agriculture. And as you know, the embargo makes it more difficult for us to use the promotional resources that are available for other countries and trade relationships. So I would hope that the committee would take that request seriously. You mentioned the importance of research. Let me underscore the significance of research. This budget obviously suggests, through discretionary and mandatory resources, to adequately and fully fund the AFRI Competitive Grant Program. During the course of the time I've been Secretary, our research has resulted in over 900 new inventions, over 450 new patents, over 800 patent applications. It is a tremendous opportunity for us to pave the way for a more productive and profitable future for our farmers and our ranchers and for rural America. And it is essential in the context of a changing climate and some of the pests and diseases that we are currently confronting that we continue to invest adequately and fully in research. Also, it is my view that we need to continue to invest in the future of our children. The reality is that we do a terrific job, I think, in reference to providing nutrition for youngsters during the school year. Over 30 million youngsters benefit from this program. 20 to 21 million of them are free and reduced lunch kids. The unfortunate circumstance, however, is when they leave school for summer vacation, only 3.8 million of those youngsters receive assistance and help through a summer feeding program. That is why the President has requested in this budget that we create a pathway to full coverage for these youngsters who are struggling, from families who are struggling, particularly in rural areas. And I would hope that you would take seriously a serious look at the summer feeding proposal that is contained in this budget. Finally, I think it is absolutely essential that this Congress finally fix the fire budget once and for all. It is a drain on our fire budget, it is a drain on our Forest Service budget, and is frankly a drain on all the other aspects of our budget. I would note in conclusion that the total discretionary request from this budget is below what was enacted in 2016, and as importantly is below by over $1.8 billion what was enacted in 2010, the first full year that a president submitted a budget. So I think we have been fiscally responsible. We have saved money. We will continue to save money. We're also saving time. We have a very aggressive process improvement effort at the USDA. Every missionary is required to have 2 major process improvement projects. To date, over 320,000 hours of time has been saved, over $65 million of savings to the budget, and nearly $45 million to our customers. That process will continue as long as I'm Secretary, and hopefully it will continue beyond. Mr. Chairman, I am extremely proud of the men and women who work at USDA. I think they do an amazing job. We have fewer of them than we did when I first started this job, but yet we are doing record levels of work. And I look forward to the questions from the committee to amplify on the record and on the future of USDA. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Let me as we're, of course, beginning the questioning portion of this of the hearing, and we're starting our hearing process for all of our subcommittees, and with 12 subcommittees that are taking place, Chairman Rogers has the responsibility to bouncing around various subcommittees during the day. And as you know, we're on such an aggressive schedule to make sure that we move forward in a timely manner. We're in the midst of that. So I want to turn to Chairman Rogers in the beginning here and let him ask any questions that he may have in case he needs to slip on to another subcommittee afterwards.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. That's very nice of you, and it's true, we've got 12 subcommittees. We're trying to have over 100 hearings this early spring in order to try to get these bills to the floor, each one of them separately during the year, even though it's a truncated year because of the elections, conventions, and the like. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that courtesy. Mr. Secretary, I know that your family, along with most families in the country, have experienced the struggles of both addiction and recovery from drug abuse, prescription drug abuse mainly, now heroin. My district, my area of Kentucky has suffered greatly and early on with OxyContin addiction. I was going to emergency rooms almost every night, seeing young people die for no reason. And I know that practically every family in the country is suffering from some contact with the problem. I was very pleased to see in January the President appointing you to head up a new initiative addressing that problem, the problem of heroin and opioid use in rural communities. You chaired the White House Rural Council since 2011. Tell us how you think the problem is different in rural America from urban America. Is there a difference?
Mr. Chairman, I think there's a significant difference. First, it has to do with the individual who may be taking pain medication and realizes that heroin is less expensive than the pain medication and transitions to heroin. It's difficult, I think, in the context of rural America where we value independence, where we value basically self-reliance for anyone to acknowledge and to admit that they've got a problem. Or for those who are loved ones to admit that a loved one has a problem. So it starts with that. There is a sense of isolation in rural America in many remote areas in terms of the ability to access services. 76% of the shortages in mental illness and substance abuse services are in rural areas. So even if you want to have help, you can't find help. And then finally, to the extent that you find the faith and the confidence and the courage to begin anew, you have to have support. You have to have the ability to visit with others who are struggling just as you are on a day-to-day basis. And the communities are not equipped to provide the level of support, recovery support, long-term, which is why I think it's going to be important to engage the faith-based community in particular in creating an environment in which AA meetings and Narcotics Anonymous meetings and so forth can take place. There is a dearth of absence of that in rural communities. So you start with the individual, you lack services, and you lack the recovery support over the long term. It makes it much more difficult, I think, in my view, which is why the thing that the President expressed to me and the concern that he has and that I share is that the mortality, and I'll finish with this, the mortality rate in every major country in the world today is going down. In other words, people are living longer. In urban and suburban America, people are living longer. White males in rural America are dying at a younger age. And they are dying because of poisoning and suicide. And all of what I talked about, I think, feeds into that tragic response, reaction.
It is tragic. I started an organization in my district 12 years ago called UNITE. Unlawful narcotics, investigations, treatment, education, a holistic approach. We can't arrest our way out of the problem. We can't teach our way out of the problem. We can't educate our way out of the problem. But we got to do all those things at the same time, holistic. Do you agree with that?
Yes, sir.
What does the federal government have in the way of help to help communities establish that holistic approach to the problem?
Well, CDC's got a grant program that is focused on prevention. There's also, within the Health and Human Services budget, resources to provide and expand behavioral service centers. Hopefully, some of those resources will be directed to rural areas. Obviously, the Department of Health and Human Service can also provide resources for the expansion of medications that can help in abuse in overdose situations. and that we can encourage the medical community to engage with us in medication-assisted treatment. I think the USDA has some creative opportunities, one in the community facilities area, the ability to use resources potentially to provide the brick and mortar for mental health services and substance abuse services. Interestingly enough, I think the Forest Service potentially has a role as well. There are recovery programs that are focused on outdoor recreation type activities. There's no reason why those outdoor recreational activities couldn't be folded into what is being done on our forests. In fact, I've asked our Forest Service to identify key forest areas, national forests, that would be most amenable to this. And we're going to try to sort of overlay that with where all of the other resources are being directed. You're absolutely right. The challenge here is to concentrate and to focus a multifaceted effort in these locations as opposed to sporadic investments all over the country, to be able to move the dial, show what the best practices are, and then replicate those best practices.
Well, I thank you for taking that chore on. It's a big one and dangerous, and it changes all the while. Does your effort include the fight against heroin as well?
Yes, sir, it does. As also in the suicide issue, which has many parallels and similarities to the abuse issue.
Very succinctly, tell us what the goals of your group is.
Well, the goal, I think, is to raise awareness of the problem, to ensure that folks who need help are going to get the help, to prevent unnecessary deaths as a result of overdose, to equip first responders with the knowledge and the medications that are successful, and at the end of the day, to see that declining mortality, that increasing mortality rate in rural America decline. That because we have fewer poisonings, we have fewer suicides, we have fewer people feeling isolated, we have more services and people being able to get the services before they turn to a life of drugs and the ultimate destruction. I mean, you mentioned my circumstance. My mother was addicted to both alcohol and prescription drugs. My mother did try to commit suicide. And, sir, I can call up those images right now.
Bless you. Thank you.
I want to thank you for your work on GMO labeling that you've done, and the attempt to try to forge a reasonable compromise on the biotech labeling issue by starting a new dialogue on both sides. I know that there are two opposing groups that are very passionate about their position, and I would give you credit for trying to find a path forward in that regard. Throughout the GMO labeling debate, we have heard all sorts of claims by both sides that many consumers seem confused about it. My question to you, Mr. Secretary, does the U.S. government consider GMO products to be safe for consumers and the environment? And if so, how can we know this?
Well, Mr. Chairman, the answer to your question is yes. We do consider them safe. This number may be a bit off, but I have seen a summary of 660 studies that have looked at the safety of GMOs in terms of human health. We know that GMOs have been providing an opportunity to reduce the level of pesticides and chemicals. There's a wonderful chart that we recently had at USDA that shows that American agriculture has increased productivity by 170%, but inputs during my lifetime, but inputs have remained relatively steady on 26% less land with 22 million fewer farmers. So part of that is the science of agriculture. Having said that, I think the industry would be the first to admit that they didn't do a particularly good job of educating not just the producers about the benefits, but also consumers. And I think there is a process now of catch-up that is going to be required, and I think the labeling debate and conversation has started that process. I would say that as we think about how to resolve this debate, we need to recognize this isn't the first and only issue that's going to be raised with reference to agriculture and processes. So we need to think of a way in which we can allow whatever the response is to be flexible enough to deal with the next issue, whatever the next issue is, and I'm pretty convinced there will be a next issue.
Looking ahead, what happens if we don't quickly address the upcoming July implementation of the Vermont mandatory GMO labeling law?
Well, I think that first and foremost, there is obviously multiple standards and multiple responses, which is going to create further confusion. You may very well also end up having some companies decide that they have to segregate product, that they have to trace it back. There's a cost associated with that. That they may have to have separate warehousing facilities. There's a cost associated with that. That they may have to have separate inspection systems. There's a cost associated with that. And I think major companies will tell you that they anticipate and expect to see increased costs, which of course will be borne primarily by consumers. There is a way to deal with this. I think at the same time respecting the safety of GMOs, but also respecting consumers' right to know. I think there is a way forward, and I think we did make progress in our conversations. We just didn't quite get to the last issue. And I think the last issue is after you create some kind of multiple mechanism for informing consumers, whether it's a smart label, whether it's a 1-800 number, whether it's a web-based system, and after you educate people about the availability of that information, the question then is, what happens at the end of that? Do you then put something on the front of the package or the back of the package that says GMO or identifies this? Or do you survey consumers to find out if they know how to use this information, if they're interested in it? And if you show a substantial number of consumers already knowledgeable, then the question is, what's the necessity of putting something on the package? I think that's kind of where that's where our conversation sort of broke apart, and I think it's a place that Congress is going to have to address.
There is concern that the administration hasn't done more to get in front of this debate and use its influence to ensure to the public that there is nothing to fear from biotech products such as seed and products that have been deemed safe for actually decades. How can USDA do more to educate consumers and ensure them that these products are completely safe?
Well, I think you can take a look at virtually every statement I've ever made about this as a secretary, and you're going to find that that statement about safety is in it. And I think we can continue to promote research and continue to promote science and continue to talk about this in the context of continued abundance of food supplies, continued safety of food supplies, and the ability to deal with global food security challenges, of which this is a critical part. I think we just continue to have this conversation with folks, but I don't think it's just the government that needs to talk about this. I think that the industry needs to be more forthcoming, and I think there's now a recognition and appreciation for that. Albeit a bit late, but I think there's going to be an aggressive effort from this point forward to educate people so that they can make informed decisions.
And I appreciate your work on that. I just think that we do need to find more efforts to educate consumers about the safety of these products, and I think we need to be creative in ways that we can move forward on it. So I hope that you and your team can be thinking of more ways within your purview of how you can we can try to educate the public on that, since it's very important. Mr. Farr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate Mr. Rogers bringing up the tragedy that's happening in rural America. It's also happening to our rural vets coming home and lack of services. I'm just curious what you've learned in this sort of new war on poverty that you're in charge of. It really is what motivated me to get into politics. I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Latin America trying to figure out what I'm going to do, and I read this book by Michael Harrington called The Other America. And I woke up and thought, my God, we got poverty back in America. Here I am in a third world country, and I'm not a registered voter. I can't get involved here, but I'm going to go home and join this war on poverty, whatever it is. And it brought me into being in elective office. And I even got on this committee not because I represent this incredible amount of agriculture, and diversity of agriculture, but really to try to root out those root causes on what I've termed the culture of poverty. We've had that war since the '60s, since Lyndon Johnson and Congress approved it, and we've spent billions of dollars on it. It's kind of a mixed bag of results. And I think you're taking a new, fresh look at it. What are the lessons you've learned that you can share with this committee? Because I think we need to realize that we deal with everything in every one of in all of Congress. We deal with everything in silos, and we fund it in silos, and it gets stuck in silos. And if we're really going to get a better bang for the buck, we've got to start breaking those silos down. not only within agencies, but across agency lines. And you've been given that charge, and you've mentioned it in some of the comments to Mr. Rogers. But is there a bigger lesson here on what the poverty, what's it look like in America, and what
Well-
are the tools it's going to take to really win that war?
Well, first of all, I think the lesson I've learned is that the level of poverty in rural America may not be fully appreciated by a lot of us. 1 out of every 4 kids who lives in rural America lives in a family at or below the poverty level. I don't think there's a recognition of that. 85% of counties with persistent poverty, with poverty rates in excess of 20%, are rural, not urban, not suburban. So first of all is a recognition that there is severe, significant, persistent poverty in rural areas. Secondly, recognizing that part of it is not just providing the services that I think are important, the feeding programs and so forth. It's also a concerted economic development effort. And an economic development effort that essentially creates, in my view, what I refer to as a sort of a new natural resource economy, where we recognize the important role of production agriculture, but we basically complement production agriculture with local and regional food systems, with conservation and ecosystem markets, with a bio-based economy, with bringing jobs that were originally outsourced to India back to the United States as companies begin to find out that it might be less expensive and more efficient for them to have people in America do these jobs than people in other countries do these jobs. A combination of those efforts and essentially recognizing that we've not done as good a job as we need to do in educating the private sector about the investment opportunities. It isn't just government's responsibility here, it's also the private sector, the capital markets, and we've done, last 2 years, we've attempted to educate people about where those opportunities are, and we're beginning to see millions of dollars being invested in business development. It's going to take time to reverse a trend that's been around for a while, but we're seeing USDA has been able to help 103,000 businesses since I've been secretary.
Do you have an example that you're proud of where you were able to revitalize a rural area?
Well, in the chairman's district in Kentucky, there's a long way to go down there. But I think there is a sense that there's a plan, that there are people paying attention, that there are people of importance who have been there, who are committed to it. That's an area. We've seen this in the Delta Regional Authority work in Appalachia, where we're basically working with those 2 regional authorities to create economic opportunity, to create investment. We've seen it we're beginning to see it in some of the areas. In Pine Ridge, for example, we're looking at ways in which we could recreate an agricultural economy. We've got a team working there to identify fractionated land that could potentially be used by the tribe to grow something that could then be marketed as grown and raised. It could be a traditional food that could be available not just on the reservation but across the country. So there are multiple examples of where this has worked, but it does require focus, and that's why Strike Force that we initiated, now in over 900 counties, where we put a team of USDA folks. It's not just the FSA guy, it's not just the RD person, it's not just the nutrition people, it's everybody going down, working with a community building organization, as we are in Kentucky, and basically saying to the local folks, what do you need? What do you want? How would you like to turn this around? And then teaching them how to play the game. I mean, the reality is that a lot of these communities that are near metropolitan areas, they know how to play the game. They know how to apply for all the programs. In those rural, remote areas, they don't. They need help. So Strike Force is helping. 188,000 investments, $23 to $26 billion has been invested since we established Strike Force. Breaking down the silos, coordinated approach, and a holistic approach. That is the way to deal with this. It is not shotgun, not program here, program here, program here. We're doing the same thing on child poverty. We're looking at this from a 2-generation perspective, not just helping kid over here and mom and dad over here, but helping family. And to amplify my remarks to the chairman, it is about economic development. It is also about jobs. If you want to deal with the opioid issue, then you got to make sure that people feel that tomorrow is going to be better than today. And right now, in many places in this country, that is not the feeling that people have. We can do better.
With the gentleman,
My time's up, but yes.
when LBJ came to Eastern Kentucky to kick off the war on poverty, a local guy, I think, summed it up pretty well. He says, if it weren't for that poverty, we wouldn't have anything at all. Think about that.
Mr. Valdeo.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Secretary, for taking some time for us today. I want to talk a little bit about crop insurance. Mr. Secretary, over the last few years, crop insurance has repeatedly come under attack by this administration. In this most recent budget request, with $1.3 million in cuts for fiscal year 2017 and $18 billion in cuts over the next 10 years, again shows an intention of annihilating this important program for our nation's farmers. My district produces over 400 different commodities and therefore relies heavily on the crop insurance program. These cuts would have devastating impact on the agriculture industry and overall economy in my district especially. But crop insurance is a key part of the agriculture industry across the nation, and it's clear that these repeated proposed reductions will continue to face broad opposition from across the agriculture industry. Does the administration's proposed budget cut to crop insurance mean it no longer supports the program?
To the contrary. I think that this administration does support the program, understands it's an important part of the risk management, important part of dealing with the vagaries of Mother Nature. Having said that, the OIG and the GAO have both criticized the department for not focusing on the preventive planning concerns that have been raised in a number of audits and a number of reports. So we have to obviously pay attention to that. You all ask us to be cognizant of our oversight responsibility and our accountability responsibility. That is reflected in the recommendations. Secondly, the crop insurance is a partnership. It's a partnership between taxpayers, between farmers, and insurance companies. What we have proposed in the price harvest loss area is a better, more equitable partnership where instead of subsidizing 62% of the premium, we would only subsidize a little over 50%. That seems to me to be an equitable partnership between the taxpayer, the farmer, and the insurance company. So I don't think it necessarily destroys the program. I think it responds to oversight concerns, and I think it provides a more equitable partnership between the partners.
I'm going to bounce over to TPP. Mr. Secretary, we continue to face very problematic issues related to dairy trade with Canada. For example, we are regularly running into various regulatory or policy shifts implemented by Canada that are designed to hurt our dairy exports to our northern neighbor. I'm concerned about the prospect of Canada backsliding from where they are today, which leads to additional questions regarding their intention to fully comply with the new TPP commitments to the United States. How can we secure a more predictable dairy trading conditions with Canada given this very troubling dynamic?
Well, it's our view that the passage of TPP and the implementation of it will do just what you're asking for. It would create responsibilities on both sides of the border, that we would work with the Canadian officials to ensure that it's implemented properly. There are opportunities for us to grow market in Canada with this agreement in terms of dairy. I think it's one of the reasons why the dairy industry has basically taken a look at this agreement, says it's not an A, but it's not an F, that there are certain aspects of this, and certainly in the first 10 years of the agreement, you would see significant opportunities both in Canada and in Japan and some of the other countries that are important to this overall agreement. This is, in my view, a plus for agriculture.
All right. Thank you, Chairman.
Ms. Pingree.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being with us today. I actually came to Congress when you started in the administration, and I've had the privilege of working with you on the Agriculture Committee and then here, and I want to echo everyone's appreciation of your service and the work that you've done and the testimony that you've given and the stones that you've handled when they're thrown at you. You bring a lot of challenges and experience to this job, and we really appreciate your experience, your heart, your knowledge, and thank you very much for all that you've had to say to us today. I want to just talk first about a extremely non-controversial issue that I think I'm happy to work with the USDA on. You've been already putting out some aggressive goals on reducing food waste, and the USDA has really been out there promoting some of the challenges that we're facing. As you know, 40% of the food produced in the United States is wasted, and that's a shocking amount of food when we have 25 million hungry Americans. If we reduced it by just 15%, we could feed 25 million hungry Americans. So there's a lot we could be doing here. It's an environmental challenge. It costs us a lot of money. It costs every family a lot of money. It's a problem for businesses in our country at the retail level and the manufacturing level. And I'm really pleased that you've set a high goal of reducing food waste by 50% in 2030. I've also sponsored a piece of legislation around that, and I've been really impressed at the level of interest from all sectors. And this is, as I said, it's not a partisan, it's not a controversial issue, but there's a lot of work that has to be done. So I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that, and I have a couple of quick questions. I mean, obviously we put forward legislation, and we hope that Congress will adopt our magnificent, huge bills, and that rarely happens. But hopefully we'll find a few ways to eke away at this. But I also think there are many things within the department. You've done a lot already and suggested a lot of goals already. But I'm going to ask you about a couple of things that maybe you could do without having to have legislative bill before you. One of them we've looked at is thinking about the NRCS to include composting practice within the EQIP program. Is that something that you might be willing to look at? Also, are there other things that you've been considering that could be just changes in how some of the programs work and how they could be expanded to help with the reduction of food waste? And are there any things in particular in the FY17 budget that are there to address some of the issues and the broad range of issues that we're talking about?
Well, Congressman, we appreciate you raising this issue because you're absolutely correct. It is an issue. And frankly, if we could reduce food waste globally, we would probably be able to feed the 850 million people that are food insecure in the world today. Look, it's three things. It's reduce, it's recycle and reuse. On the reduce side, it's basically working with the food industry, with the restaurant industry, with grocery stores that have delis, to basically take a look at the portion sizes that are being supplied, because oftentimes they are more than people need, and oftentimes they're not the kind of food that you will take home in a doggy bag kind of thing. So it's basically taking a look at really making sure that we reduce this. We're working, interestingly enough, focusing on some of the universities. They've noticed that depending upon how they construct the trays and what the trays look like, they can substantially reduce the amount of food waste and the amount of food that people take. So we're going to continue to work with this. We're also looking at our school lunch program, creating a table, a choice table, where if a youngster is not interested in a particular fruit because he doesn't like apples but he likes oranges, basically allowing people to put a fruit on the plate, from their plate on the table, and take a fruit that they do like from the table and put it on their plate. We're looking at the ability to reuse food. We've worked with HHS and FDA and others to try to streamline the rules for charitable contributions of food. There are many, many ways in which unused food could potentially be used in food banks and in community kitchens, but there are regulations that are a barrier. Let's take a look at those regulations and see if they can be fixed. And then on the recycle piece of this, even at our own facility at USDA, we've begun an issue of recycling both our coffee grounds at the main headquarters here in D.C., using it I think on our People's Garden. Also at our labs, we're recycling some of the waste product from our labs and composting that as well. You mentioned an interesting idea, which I'm happy to take back to NRCS and have them think creatively about how EQIP could potentially be used to support this. So it's all of that, and it's also working in the international sphere as part of our Smart Agricultural Alliance. To the extent that you can reduce food waste, you reduce what it goes into the landfills, because the single largest piece of solid waste in a landfill is food waste. It's a producer of methane, and we can make a big dent on this.
Great. Thank you very much.
Dr. Harris.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, this morning. Let me just ask one question, I guess a comment about the USDA's Community Facilities Program, which again, the direct loans were, the guaranteed loans were once again zeroed out, in favor of direct loans. And, this is just always puzzling to me, because the community banks are part of the backbone of rural communities, and they need some of this. They need to do some of this loan activity in order to stay in business. And it's unfortunate the USDA makes a conscious choice every year reverses that decision. But the reversal of that decision really ought to come from your office, not from Congress. But let me talk a little bit about priorities, because the budget goes down, your budget request goes down, but there's an interesting part that goes up in the budget, and it's the electric program direct loans. It goes up by $1 billion in the budget, and that's the loans, of course, so it's not 100% cost to the department. But I had a visit yesterday from Mr. Dyes, who lives down in Crisfield, and I doubt you've ever been to Crisfield because it's the farthest part of the most rural area of my district on the Eastern Shore. He didn't ask for renewable energy. He wanted broadband. So you look at the REAP program, the electric program, and you got to wonder what we're doing. The purpose of the program historically is to bring electric service to rural areas. And now it apparently has morphed into the President's Climate Action Plan, because you made a conscious choice to increase those loans and not increase significantly the loans for broadband programs or for telecommunications services. And this is what rural areas need now. Mr. Dyes, who runs this computer company, needs broadband. If we want to maintain businesses in rural areas, we need to bring that broadband in. And yet apparently you place a higher priority on renewable energy. Now this is curious to me, because a lot of, and I'm sorry the chairman's not here anymore, but it would be striking if in Kentucky, rural Kentucky, the department spent its money on eliminating coal energy, because apparently that's one of the main goals now of this program. So can you justify for me why we should be spending $1 billion on solar panels and wind power and things, while Mr. Dyes down in Crisfield still doesn't have broadband?
Well, Congressman, you're sitting next to Congressman Young, who is from my home state of Iowa, and he probably could tell you the significance of
Crisfield over bringing broadband to Crisfield.
Well, I don't think it does, because we basically almost quadrupled the amount of broadband grants in this budget.
Mr. Secretary, Mr.
Congressman,
Dyes
you asked me a
doesn't
question, and I'm
have
going to answer it, but you got to
broadband.
give me a chance to answer it. If you look at our budget, we've asked for $39 million in broadband grants. The reason those grants are important is because in those remote areas, you have a very difficult time finding a telecommunications company that wants to put broadband in, because there simply aren't enough people to support it. So the grant program is important. Going from $10 million to $39 million is a reflection of the importance that we place on broadband. The importance we place on electric is that there are many utilities that are looking for opportunities to diversify the feedstock or the energy source for the energy that they're going to produce. They don't necessarily want to build a new facility, a generation facility. They would prefer a solar facility, or they would prefer a wind facility. So it is basically providing options and choices. That's the reason.
Again, the purpose of the electric service was to bring electric power.
It is.
Not types of electric power, just get electricity running. So I would urge you to...
Ms. DeLauro.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Mr. Secretary, and Dr. Johansson, and Mr. Young. Always great to see you. And I thank you. I associate myself with the comments of my colleagues of thanking you for the service and for the cooperation over the years. I wanted to just say that with regard to the budget, I want to thank you for including strong expansion of child nutrition programs, access through the summer meals, through the SNAP program. I also want to comment on thanking you for your work to expand our relationships with Cuba and establishing an in-country presence. It may or may not come out, but at some point it should, about the restrictions that have been placed on U.S. farmers in this regard. So thank you for that. And I was also pleased that the request supported reorganization authority for the next administration to consolidate our food safety agencies into one single food safety agency. I will continue to make that fight, Mr. Secretary. Let me, very briefly on the summer meals program. This is about kids losing access to school breakfast, lunch during the summer months. I quite frankly, I was disappointed with the Senate program, which was talking about moving through WIC versus SNAP, but your proposal is to move through the SNAP program. No cap on the number of kids. It seemed to me that if we were capping children, it was a Sophie's choice. What kid is going to get a summer meal program? Just touch on, because I have a couple of other questions. Why is it better to redeem benefits under SNAP than under the WIC program? I'll get into the next question so that you can then answer it here. This has to do with WIC and the Flint question, Mr. Secretary. I don't have to demonstrate to you what's happening in Flint, Michigan, worst public health crisis our nation has faced. 4% of Flint's children have elevated levels of lead in their bloodstream due to contaminated water. No amount of lead is safe for children to consume, and the repercussions of lead poisoning last a lifetime. So Flint families deserve answers, and they deserve justice. I was pleased and announced at the hearing yesterday when I got the word that what we've done is to USDA said the agency approved a request to temporarily allow WIC funds to be used to test lead levels for the people of Flint. At the same time, and you and I have talked about this, the issue of the request by Michigan to expand access to WIC for Flint children ages 5 to 10. The pediatrician yesterday who spoke at the hearing said that the two ways in which we could assist these children, because we don't know what the outcomes are going to be, is through good nutrition and through education. This is about good nutrition here. If you can tell me why a difference in approving one request, denying another, the number of kids who can, and I know where your heart is on this, I really do, the volume of kids up to age 10 who can benefit from healthy meals to mitigate against the negative effects of lead exposure. What resources do you need from us to meet the nutritional needs of these kids in this time of crisis?
Quick response to both questions. The reason for the EPT proposal on summer feeding is that you've got remote areas that don't necessarily have a congregate meal site, and the EBT card seems to be successful in the pilots that we have used over the course of the last several years. On the Flint situation, look, the thing we need is a line from Congress that basically gives us the authority to do what Flint's asked us to do. Mm-hmm. We don't believe we have the authority to provide WIC benefits to children above the age of 5 because of the law. If Congress directs us to provide benefits in an expanded way to Flint or to children in other communities that are negatively impacted by circumstances, we'll
so
be happy
if we
to
gave you the authority, you would be willing to
do it.
to do this. And I thank you. And by the way, Flint is an urban desert. They have very little at their, and I talk about urban poverty and urban hunger as well. Last question in this round is about ABOD waivers. 500,000 to 1 million childless adults are going to be cut off SNAP in 2016. As the 3-month limit on benefits for unemployed childless returns in most areas. My home state of Connecticut is one of them. Able-bodied adults without dependents, that population is diverse, it struggles, and it's an underserved group. We have a veteran waiting for a disability determination due to a backlog of cases at the VA. I'm concerned that we do not know a lot about this population. We need better data. What is the agency doing to keep track of the vulnerable population so that we can serve them better?
Well, let me tell you that for calendar year 2016 in Connecticut, we've already approved a waiver of the time limit in 82 jurisdictions, towns and cities, including New Haven. We know that in FY15, 31 states were eligible. We estimate that 22 of those states will probably no longer qualify for a statewide time limit waiver, but at some point they could potentially come to us with a more restricted request based on counties, based on unemployment statistics in a particular area. And we're obviously focused as well on ensuring that our employment and training program in SNAP is doing the job it's intended to do by working with states to improve the ability to link people who are on SNAP with employment opportunities that exist in an improving economy.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Mr. Palazzo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, this might be your last hearing, but it's my first hearing, so congratulations to you. Real quick, the CFO Act requires executive branch agencies to submit their annual financial reports to Congress by November 15th of each year. USDA has still not submitted this report for fiscal year 2015. This will be the second consecutive year this report has been late. And as you know, much of the data that this committee relies upon when it drafts this annual appropriations bill comes from the information provided by your department in the form of congressional budget justifications. So with that, yesterday this committee had the Commodity Futures Trading Commission before it, and they were in a similar situation with delayed financial statements. It turns out that this was due to their auditors having issues with the quality and soundness of their statements. Does USDA have a similar issue with its auditors that is causing the delay in releasing its financial statements?
We requested an extension. We did change auditors. I signed the letter this morning, and I would anticipate and expect that that will be filed tomorrow.
So we'll receive the audit report tomorrow?
Yes,
Or
sir.
soon thereafter? Okay.
Sir.
Well, so no issues, just the change of auditor?
Well, whenever you have a change of auditors, there are always issues as to how one auditor sees a set of numbers and how other auditors see it. We're continuing to work through those issues. You'll see that in the audit report.
Okay. Well, I look forward to seeing the audit report. Let's talk cotton for a minute. You know, cotton is extremely important to my state and surrounding states in the South. I believe you've been asked by the Ag Chairman, Conway, and others, several other members of Congress have requested that cottonseed be designated as an oil seed. And I think to the date, you've said that you do not have the authority to do that, and we somewhat disagree with you because it feels like you've taken actions in regards to the Commodity Credit Corporation to bolster an industry in your home state. And then again in 2015, you've worked with the Department of Energy to provide $500 million in bio-based jet fuel to the Department of Navy. And then again, just this last May, you used the CCC to increase biofuel infrastructure, another $100 million. Again, this was all without any new legislative authority from Congress, and so a lot of members of Congress think you already have that authority under the same act. Can you just tell me, and I guess this committee, is there anything that's preventing you from using this similar authority for the cotton industry?
I would say that there are two things. Number one, the case of Marks versus General Revenue Corporation, which was a 2013 Supreme Court case, establishes a well-established principle of statutory construction, and that is if Congress knowingly omits something from an act, then the provision cannot be reasonably interpreted to allow the omitted act. Congress, when it established the 2014 Farm Bill, basically took cotton out of the program and put it into a separate program, the STAX program. The oilseeds provision is designed primarily for emerging oilseeds to participate in a program during periods between farm bills. That's not the circumstance here. Basically, Congress was fully aware of cottonseed, fully aware of the oilseed of cotton, made the decision to remove it and place it in a separate program. The industry then came to RMA and asked for oilseeds to be included with cotton for crop insurance purposes. So you basically take the Supreme Court case, you combine it with the actions of Congress, and you've got a circumstance where we don't believe we have the authority. You've mentioned CCC. We have used that in the past, but there was a provision within the 2015 appropriations bill that prohibited us from doing that. If that prohibition were removed, we would obviously be in a position to use CCC.
All right. Well, thank you for your explanation. Also, reading through your report, you know, I guess I looked where you're doubling your request to help socially disadvantaged and veterans through your loan program to try to get them started. I'm more in particular interested in your help with our nation's veterans. After all, we've been at war for, I think, 13, 14 years. Hundreds of thousands of young men and women have served this nation. And so coming back, can you just elaborate a little bit more on how USDA is helping our veterans? Maybe if you have any specifics on the number of veterans that you have helped and Any specifics to the program?
I'm headed to Fort Stewart in Georgia tomorrow to make an announcement, I think, on a regional conservation partnership program. Fort Stewart was where our military liaison, Lalonde Bacam, I think, was there last week, basically lining up a memorandum of understanding between veterans organizations, USDA, to basically provide an opportunity for us to be on base as folks are disengaging from the military, giving them an opportunity to consider a career in agriculture, providing them information about our programs. We just reformulated our website for beginning farmers so that you can actually go on the website, you can plug in the type of farmer you would like to be, and then there is basically a menu specifically designed for you in terms of what the USDA programs are that could help you get started. We are continually working with the Department of Defense to get information about our programs to returning veterans, and we are working with a number of organizations. We find returning veterans particularly interested in local and regional food systems, and so we are basically providing grants, loans, microloans, tunnel houses to extend the growing season for those folks, and there are literally hundreds of those examples. We'll be glad to get you the statistics from our military liaison and be happy to have him come up and brief you in more detail on precisely what he's doing.
I would appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Mr. Bishop.
Thank you very much. Welcome, Mr. Secretary, Mr. Hanson, and Mr. Young. Let me just join my colleagues in thanking you for your service, Mr. Secretary. It's hard to believe it's been 7 years. It's gone by very, very quickly, but you've done so much for our farmers, for our rural communities around the country, our land-grant universities, and our school children, the school lunch and the breakfast programs that otherwise wouldn't receive that nutrition, and of course the family nutrition programs. And of course USDA touches every family in every part of the country, and of course not just rural communities, but we appreciate your vigilance there. The Cuba expansion is extremely important, and I'm happy to see your initiatives there as well as the veterans programs. Now let me just say that I wanted to put on the record that as Krista Harden's congressman, the Deputy Secretary who has indicated that she is resigning shortly, I just wanted to say that I'm very proud of her accomplishments as Secretary, as Deputy Secretary, and that she has done a tremendous job. She's been very helpful in serving agriculture across the United States. She grew up in a peanut farm in my district, and of course worked for the committee here in the House, and she has proven well and has had a great career. Now, let me associate myself, sir, with the remarks of Mr. Palazzo with regard to cotton. A number of us, including the chairman of the subcommittee, have some real serious concerns with how we can help our cotton farmers with the tremendous challenges that they're now facing. And so if you can continue to work and to help us get some help for those cotton farmers, and I like hearing that perhaps the CCC can be utilized if we're able to give to remove the prohibition in the appropriations bill, which this subcommittee has the power to do. So let me move quickly then to pecans. The pecan industry, Mr. Secretary, has worked hard to put together a proposed marketing order, and we appreciate the assistance that USDA has provided. We'd hoped to get it in place for the 2016 crop, but there are a number of events that have to occur, a notice and a referendum, et cetera. Can you kind of update us as to where we are with the pecan order, and if we'll be able to have the referendum in time for the 2016 crop if it passes? And secondly, with regards to pecans, the Ag Statistical Services has suspended the non-citrus fruits and nuts preliminary 2015 summary report. And this report would typically contain the January crop estimate for the 2015 pecan crop. Without the report, the pecan industry does not have an update from the October 2015 estimate until July of 2016 final crop numbers reported. This January number is a very important data point for the entire industry, spanning from the grower to the sheller to the end users of pecans. Can you check with your staff to see what we need to do to get the report back in the queue at USDA and to make sure that we have it in place for 2017. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and hearing from you.
Congressman, let me first of all express my appreciation for your acknowledgement of Krista Hardin's contribution to this department. If I've been successful as a secretary, it's in large part because I've had two great deputies. And Krista has been just an incredible friend, an incredible advocate for rural America, and she's going to be sorely missed at USDA. As it relates to cotton, one of the ideas that we came up with was the possibility of providing some assistance and help with cotton ginning, which potentially could help co-ops that are producer-owned. That's something we could potentially do, but obviously removing the prohibition that's in the 15 budget bill would be probably the simplest and quickest way for us to provide help. We want to help. This is not a question of us not wanting to help. It's a question of us wanting to make sure that we do it properly and legally, and that we don't create difficulties for the industry relative to trade and other issues. On we refer to them up in my state as pecans. So for a while I didn't understand what you were asking. The pecan order, that's something I'm going to have to get back to you on, Congressman. I think it's in the process, and I think it's in the queue, but I think there are several other matters that the AMS folks are working on, but I will get back to you with that. I will tell you that the NASS final report for non-citrus fruit and nut is going to be issued in July, so that will provide some degree of information about production, marketing, and price. And I think if the NASS budget is adequately funded and supported, those kinds of preliminary reports can be resumed. It's really an issue with funding, and it's obviously it's tough because we're dealing with a budget that's less than it was in 2010, and I understand and appreciate the challenges that Congress has. And when you have those challenges, you have to decide what to do, and this was a situation where they made a choice. But if the funding is there, I'm sure they would be more than happy to resume the preliminary report.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. My mother grew up in North Carolina calling them pecans, and my dad grew up in Mississippi calling them pecans. So I isolate from point to point. Let me just commend you for your efforts on persistent poverty. The strike force has been a real plus in terms of addressing persistent poverty, but also I'd like for you to comment on the 10-20-30 program that's been offered, put on the table by our colleague Congressman Clyburn, and of course it's been looked at very closely by Speaker Ryan as well as Chairman Hal Rogers. And they're looking favorably at it. And can you kind of tell us how you can incorporate that with the efforts you're already undertaking to try to make sure that we're able to address persistent poverty in these rural communities all across the country, from Appalachia all the way down through the South?
And Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary, if you could sort of
very quickly
briefly answer,
yeah.
And then we can come back and have another round and you can add some more. So
Very quickly, we currently exceed those limits at USDA. More than 20% of our resources are being spent in the counties where the poverty rate exceeds 20%, and we were gauging that by the year 2016. We got there in 2015.
Ms. Lowy, we're glad to have the ranking member of the full committee with us, and so I'd like to recognize her for any questions or comments that she may have.
Well, I thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Ranking Member, and all my colleagues for indulging me. As you know, there are several hearings going on at the same time, and I do apologize, Secretary Vilsack, for not being here for your opening statement. And for me, this committee has such critical issues. I look forward to having some in-depth discussions, particularly, you know and I know that hunger doesn't stop at the end of the school year. When you look at the numbers, it's hard to believe there are over 20 million school-age children that lack access to healthy and affordable meals during the summer months. Now, when my kids were little, I remember all the schools were open and the day camps would be providing meals, but we're not keeping them opening anymore. I have been such a strong advocate for the summer EBT pilot program. it really is essential to help kids, needy kids, get what they should be getting automatically. Not parents shouldn't have to worry how they're going to feed their kids in the summer. So I was very pleased to see a requested increase in the summer EBT pilot program, as well as to expand the program. I can't believe it. I kept looking at those notes, and we're going to expand it by 2026. And I said to myself, what percentage of the kids who really need it are going to have to wait to 2026 to get the summer meals? So this proposal could provide summer meals to approximately 900,000 hungry children in New York as much needed. Could you give me an idea how you're ramping up the summer EBT program? Is there any way we could do it faster? And what are we learning from the summer EBT pilot program that would make the national expansion a success? So thank you for the proposal. I'm sorry we have to wait 10 years. How could we do this more quickly? What would it take? And what are we learning? Thank you.
During the course of the 7+ years I've been secretary, we've increased summer meals by 26 million. We're probably serving 500,000 more kids than we did in 2009. But it is a slow process because you have to get sponsors, you have to get people willing to provide a congregate meal site. The unfortunate circumstance in rural America in particular is that there are not necessarily congregate meal sites available or people willing to sponsor them. So the EBT provides a quicker, simpler, direct way to providing help to families to basically meet the needs, nutritional needs for kids during the summer. We've seen the success of that and the interest of that and the desire for folks to have it. If the Congress provides us the resource, depending upon the level of resource you provide, that will determine how many more youngsters we can potentially help and how many more families we can help. It's a matter of resources. So the more resources you provide, the more we can do. Now, in the past, what we've seen, unfortunately, is a curtailment of that EBT. We were able to, several years ago, feed more kids through it, and it's been sort of reduced over the last couple of years. So to the extent that you can add more resources, we'll do more work.
Now, just for clarification, it's all about resources, not setting up the systems?
Well, the system, I mean, basically the system, we know how to set up the system because we've done it on the pilot program. And trust me, the people who work for the Food and Nutrition Consumer Service are anxious to provide help and assistance to as many children as possible. So I don't think it's a situation where we couldn't do it. We would do it. But it is somewhat defined by the amount of resources that's made available.
That's very helpful, and I hope that my colleagues can work together in a bipartisan way on this issue to make sure kids have food. We have a super food bank program in my community, and as you were saying, it's the resources that are so very important. So we could ramp up if we had the resources sooner than 10 years.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
That's very helpful. Now, one other question. When you look at the numbers of seniors that face insecurity, it's about 15%. Seniors who've worked their whole lives should be enjoying retirement, not wondering where their next meal will come from. And your budget requests $9 million to improve access to SNAP for low-income seniors, and you are proposing some new reforms, giving states the authority to waive certain requirements for elderly participants that are unnecessary and deter continuing participation, such as frequent income verification for the elderly. Can you just tell me what obstacles does the department face in getting the message out about SNAP for the elderly? And how would the proposed changes better address the difficulty of providing access to SNAP?
Today, 85% of eligible folks are receiving SNAP. That's up from 72% when I became secretary. But one of the critical areas where we are not doing that level is with seniors. Only 41% of eligible seniors are receiving SNAP. Part of that, I think, is a situation where people may not be aware that they're entitled to the benefits. Part of it may be that folks misinterpret what SNAP is. They see it as welfare, not as a nutrition assistance. They may not recognize that it's in all of our best interest for seniors to be well nourished. It reduces health care costs, et cetera. So And part of it is that there are barriers. I mean, the fact is that a senior citizen's income is not likely to change unless they hit the lottery, which, you know, if they hit the lottery, then they don't need SNAP. The reality is that we're asking them to certify every year, and that's very difficult for somebody who's in their 70s and 80s and 90s to be able to do the work. And so what we're suggesting is perhaps the recertification would be stretched out over a period of several years as opposed to a single year, and we think that that would provide for greater opportunity to expand coverage. And again, making the case that this is not welfare, this is something that's beneficial to them as well as to us.
I think that's a great idea. So you're saying we would save money by not have as many people going out there certifying, and more people will get SNAP without having to certify.
Every year.
Good suggestion, every year. Good suggestion. Thank you very much, and we thank you again for your service, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're very welcome. Mr. Young.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here, Secretary Vilsack. Good to see you, a fellow Iowan from Dallas County. Dr. Johansson, thank you for being here, and Mr. Young as well. You are the longest-serving department secretary under this administration, and I'm glad you're still here. That tells me a few things. Hopefully it means you enjoy your job and you find it fulfilling and with joy, and also I know it means your support and commitment to agriculture and public service in general, so thank you for doing what you do. And of course, I want to thank you for all your support for renewable fuels, renewable energy. Whether you use that from your bully pulpit or just your policies. I appreciate that very much. You know, in going around to the farm bureaus, the commodity group meetings in the district, town halls, the elevators and cooperatives, there's a real concern about the rural economy right now. And I know that, you know, we all hear that in a sense. You do too. Ag income is down. I believe, Dr. Johansson, you probably would have the better statistic, but I think it was about a third, at least in Iowa last year. Cash inputs are up, even though oil prices are down and fuel prices. Commodities are low, even though we've had just some record yields with corn and beans. Regulations, I hear, are squeezing the farmers, particularly from the EPA, not your jurisdiction, but you hear about it as well. Land prices are moving, perhaps not significantly one way or the other, up or down. Maybe they're just adjusting. So my question really is, what do you see happening out there in the agricultural economy? Is this a short-term situation, long-term, and how can we foster an economy to improve and renew strength in our agricultural economy?
Well, Congressman, would certainly we'll get you a copy of the briefing that I received recently about farm income and specifically about median household income in among farmers. You're correct. Farm income, net farm income is down. Median household income for commercial-sized operations that you're talking about, when you take a look at the non-farm income, is actually up a little bit. So, and then the heartland has been hit less so than some of the other areas of the country. The Northern Crescent has been hit pretty hard. The Fruitful Rim has been hit hard, but we'll get this information to you. Look, it's about increasing export markets. That's why I think trade agreements are important. It's why I think having personnel in Cuba eventually will provide opportunities. It is about what happens not just in the United States but around the world. You know, China's economy has obviously impacted and affected our export situation with China. It's about the strength of the dollar, which is a reflection of many things, but it's a reflection of the strong American economy versus other global, other countries' economies. It's creating additional ways in which product can be used, and that's why I have been supportive of the renewable fuel industry and the renewable energy industry, and why we are now branching out to the bio-based industry, where we're essentially looking at ways in which we can use ingredients, waste product from agricultural enterprises to produce chemicals, materials that are bio-based. It's currently a $369 billion industry, 4 million people employed, but we think we can build on that. It's creating new ways to encourage utilization of land in a more profitable way. The need for ecosystem markets, water markets, habitat markets are creating new opportunities for resources to be invested in farmland. And it's also the local and regional food system, which is, interestingly enough, helping out some of the residential and intermediate-sized farming operations. So it's a combination of all that and much more. We are focused on making sure that the safety net is there. We made $5.2 billion in payments under the ARC and PLC program to nearly 45% of our producers in 2015. One would expect if commodity prices remain where they are that those will be additional expenses or additional investments that will be made for our producers. And while the land values are being affected, the good news is that we are significantly better off than we were in the 1980s when we had very difficult times with low commodity prices, high debt, and lowering values of equity. That's not the case here. There's a significant difference between this time and the 1980s.
Thank you for that. And I want to thank you for working with our office. We're doing an agriculture and transportation roundtable here later this month back in the district. It'll be a productive conversation, I hope, regarding the issues our farmers, ranchers, and producers encounter regarding getting their goods to market. There's been some interruptions in transportation, which has regarded that, ports, the rail, that kind of thing. We put some language in the last year's conference report, FY16, contained language directing the Secretary to submit a long-term infrastructure plan that benefits American producers and provides examples of how USDA is working with other federal agencies to prevent future transportation mishaps. Now, I know it's not your direct mission, but there's such a nexus there between getting our goods to market and having a strong transportation infrastructure. I just am curious about any kind of update on that plan and any foresight you see in improving that.
Well, at the time that was passed, we still had not yet had a transportation bill. The good news is that Congress has provided the 5-year transportation funding, which I think will make a difference in terms of the concerns and barriers that you are concerned about and that we're concerned about in terms of how to get product to market more quickly and more efficiently, less expensively, and provide a competitive edge for our producers. We're in the process of factoring all that into a report back to you, and we'll be getting it soon. But the fact that we now have a transportation bill obviously is going to change the conclusion. If we had not had a long-term transportation bill, then the conclusions might have been a little bit different.
I recognize that was on us, and hopefully we're on our way. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Mr. Rooney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, good to see you. Sorry I'm a little bit under the weather. That's why I've been watching you from the ante room, but I appreciate you being here today and your service as the Secretary for the last 7 years. I got a call the other day from one of my citrus growers. As you know, I represent one of the largest citrus producing districts in the country, if not the largest. And the concern that he has and other growers that I have are, as you know, we kind of feel like we're at the moment of truth here with regard to citrus greening and whether or not we're going to be able to continue producing in the way that we have historically. Boxes are down. Growers are uncertain whether or not they're going to be able to convince their children to take over their groves moving forward. And it's just not, for a lot of people, productive as far as making money. And they're not going to do this for free, as you know. So with that, he called and asked if there was any way to try to expedite the dollars. And believe me, we are very grateful and we are happy with the relationship we've had with you and the administration on trying to fight greening. But in this year's budget, the MAC program, the HLB MAC program, is not being funded. And growers like this, and I'm concerned that this sends a message that the short-term programs that we've been working on in the past might not be as big a priority for the administration as they have been. And so I guess what I'm getting at, and I have a roundtable today with a bunch of growers and scientists, what would you say to them if you were at this roundtable as far as what the short-term programs and how important they are? I guess these people just sort of feel like the long-term plans are one thing, but they don't feel like they have the long-term to wait. And so I just don't want to lose focus on the short-term programs like the MAC program and the funding that we've had in the past. So if you could address them, what can I say to them later today when I have them in a room as far as what the short-term program should be?
Well, Congressman, I think the fact that we don't have a line item doesn't necessarily mean it's not funded. I think it's included and will be included in APHIS's overall response and reaction. So I don't think you're necessarily going to see a diminishment of interest in the MAC. I think you're just going to basically, we didn't put it in as a separate line item, but we did include it in the overall APHIS budget. So you can reassure them that there's going to continue to be that coordinated effort. Already $61 million has been spent on that coordinated effort. We'll continue to provide assistance. You can also tell them that we continue to focus on research. Just recently announced over $20 million of additional research under the Citrus Screening Research Initiative. That was announced in the last couple of days. That brings a total of about $50 million that's been committed, of roughly $100 million that's been authorized for that. And you can also point that we continue to try to use the tree assistance, disaster assistance. It's relatively small, but it does provide some assistance in terms of essentially eliminating groves that are contaminated. Look, this is an incredibly sad circumstance because it is not a situation where it impacts or affects one producer. It's infecting the entire industry, and that's one of the reasons why the fruit rim farm income is down almost 5% compared to other parts of the country where it's not quite as much. So we're going to continue to work on this, and we're going to try to figure out if we can find the way to deal with this. We've looked at heat, we've looked at chemical treatments, we've looked at phosphorus. I mean, we've looked at a variety of different ways to deal with this, and we're going to continue to figure it out until we get this figured out.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Mr. Yoder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, welcome to the committee. Appreciate your testimony today. I want to join my colleague from Iowa, Mr. Young, in echoing his concerns about the agriculture economy, and I appreciated your responses there and the dialogue you have. And when you look at ag income down 56% over 3 years, which has been mentioned in this hearing, it's concerning to a lot of us. I come from a long line of farmers. I grew up in rural Kansas on a farm, and my grandparents farmed the same farm, and you know that's part of the tradition and American heritage. I grew up in the 80s when you mentioned the 80s. You know, those are tough times, and I remember neighbors, you know, going bankrupt, and I, you know, it can look rosy one day. It's just like, you know, the crops in general. It can look rosy one day, and the next day it can't. And so I'm concerned about it, and I want to ensure that we do everything we can to protect the rural way of life and protect farmers to ensure they can provide a consistent food supply, which allows us to put food on the table for the SNAP program and other things. I also wanted to echo Mr. Valadeo's concerns that he raised, that I know you answered his question regarding crop insurance. You know, last year the House had, and the Congress passed a bill that made temporary reduction to crop insurance. That, of course, is something that many of us opposed. Does not set well with farmers who feel that this is a tough time. And I just want to always echo to you on behalf of farmers in Kansas how important that crop insurance program is. And I know you expressed support for it, but we would certainly not be supporting additional cuts that have been recommended to the tune of $18 billion over the next decade. I wanted to turn your attention a little bit to the rules and regulations that affect farmers, and I know you've been at this a long time. You hear from these folks just like I do. They feel under assault from the EPA, from various government agencies, and I guess I want to know, as it relates to these regulations that ultimately increase the cost of agriculture, which makes it more expensive for all of our constituents to buy groceries in their markets. Where's the USDA on the Waters of the U.S. rule? You support it, you oppose it. What's the USDA doing to ensure that farmers have a voice in that process and they are being represented as the administration makes these types of decisions?
Congressman, I come from a state that is currently dealing with a very serious circumstance involving farming and water quality. The Des Moines Water Works, and Congressman Young knows this very well, has sued 3 drainage districts in northwest Iowa, alleging that they have failed to properly conduct their business, and the result of it is that water users in the city of Des Moines are incurring greater expense as a result. That is now before the federal courts. I'm very concerned about that. Very concerned that a federal judge may decide that case, and in doing so may create rules, regulations, and directions for producers that will be extremely difficult to comply with. So I've obviously been urging an effort on the part of the state to work with us to create a much more aggressive conservation effort, a voluntary conservation effort. This underscores the dynamic that's out there. It isn't just farmers who are concerned about all of these issues. We now are beginning to see water, wastewater treatment operations begin to raise this issue. So I think from my perspective, USDA's responsibility is to make sure that we do everything we can to make sure that resources from conservation are put in place, that they're put in place in a strategic way, that they're put in place in the critical watersheds in a landscape scale approach that we can actually positively impact and affect water quality and water quantity. EPA's got its own responsibilities. We obviously provide our input, but I'm not in a position to tell a sister agency what they could or should not do. I can provide them input in terms of how I believe what they are thinking about doing will impact and affect folks that I'm responsible for, which we have done and which we'll continue to do on a variety of issues, not just this one. But I will tell you that this is an issue, the issue of water and water quality is an issue that is bubbling up through the surface here, no pun intended. And I think it is going to be absolutely extremely important for us to use our conservation programs in a very strategic and thoughtful way. That's why this Regional Conservation Partnership Program is so important.
Well, and I appreciate that, Mr. Secretary, and I think the concern is that many times these federal regulations like WOTUS don't really take into consideration how difficult it is to implement, and taking little streams on a farmer's land, and I've heard from my home builders, it creates all sorts of complications and expenses. And what we don't realize is that makes it that much harder on farmers who are trying to survive in this economy. It makes it that much harder to keep agriculture costs down, which ultimately end up hit the pocketbook of all of our constituents. Lastly, I'd just say as a follow-up, what regulations and new mandates should we expect in the final year of this administration that you are aware of? Often in either party, last year's administrations mean fast-paced new things that they're trying to get in before the end of the deadline. What's the USDA aware of? What's coming down the pike that farmers and agriculture world should be concerned about?
I can just speak for my department. We're focused on trying to finish the work that has begun that we think is important. There are some issues that are in the organic world that I know that some representatives are very interested in that we're going to try to finish. In terms of other issues, there are always issues involving pesticides and chemicals that we're keeping an eye on, but I don't know that there's any quote-unquote new thing that we're going to try to rush through the process. I think from my perspective, what we're going to try to do is do what we've done well and make sure that it's grounded and institutionalized so it continues, and complete the work that we think is feasible and possible to be completed, and recognizing that future administrations can easily overturn regulations that are passed in the last minute. That's not my intent. My intent is to finish the job I started.
Thank you. Let me switch over to the high-path avian influenza, and thank you for you and your work, and the folks at APHIS did a tremendous job in working to try to work with the poultry and the layer industry to prevent not only prevent, but also to combat and contain the disease. I've got a lot of poultry growers in the district that I represent in northern Alabama, and quite honestly, a lot of poultry growers throughout Alabama itself. And there is a close watch on the department's response to the disease in these areas that have been affected. And I know you've used your authority to provide some indemnity payments, which we do appreciate, and that APHIS just released an interim rule on how indemnification would be handled as we move forward. Tell us a little bit about the modifications of the indemnity payments and how the requested increase in the budget fits in the department's plans to move forward to combat the disease.
Well, first of all, on the indemnity payments, we recognize that when we were making payments to the owners of the birds, we weren't necessarily providing assistance and help to those who were raising the birds, the producers. So we felt that there was a necessity to change the indemnification process so that it would be a fair allocation and equitable allocation between the owner of a bird and a producer who's raising the bird. And that's primarily that together with changing the way in which we would indemnify for cleaning and disinfecting. We found that we were ending up paying not just for the disease that we were combating, but also for some facilities that had not been properly maintained over a long period of time, and we recognize that perhaps it's not our responsibility to clean up 10 years of problems, it's our responsibility to deal with AI. So those are the two fundamental changes. The reason, we're focused on a more rapid response. It means that we have to have lab facilities ready to go to make the determination as quickly as possible that we're dealing with AI and what type of AI we're dealing with. We need to make sure that we can get our teams in place so that depopulation can occur as quickly as possible, hopefully within 24 hours. We need to make sure that we are working with the industry to improve biosecurity measures so that if there is an outbreak, that we can contain it. Now, what we have found from the preliminary research of the spring event last year is that these migratory birds basically decided to stop in Iowa and Minnesota for a longer stay than they normally stay, which is the reason why we saw such a concentration of this. So we obviously have additional work to do in terms of figuring out precisely how to deal with this. We're also looking at vaccines where there's no commitment to use the vaccine. We know that there's some controversy about this, but in the event there is a decision to use it, we want to make sure that it is stockpiled. So we're in the process of, I think, developing roughly a 50 million dose stockpile, because the reality is while we had to depopulate 50 million birds, not all those birds were sick. A really small percentage of those birds were sick. So potentially you've got a situation where if you really figure this out, you might be able to be more strategic in terms of depopulation efforts. And we're obviously continuing to make sure that our trading partners understand and appreciate that when this occurs and pops up, while it may impact imports from that particular county or state, it shouldn't impact imports from other parts of the United States that are not currently suffering from AI. And I think we've done, for the most part, a pretty good job of getting people to understand that. We still have a few outliers.
Okay. Let me switch to, there's been a discussion a little bit earlier about SNAP, and I know that some states have expressed interest in implementing a drug testing policy for SNAP, but USDA has not allowed the states to implement any type of policy like that. Just wanted to get your rationale and on why you deny states the option of implementing some type of drug testing program.
Well, there are already restrictions in terms of who can get SNAP in terms of folks who have violated the law. And the question is, what other programs are that we support, that we provide assistance to, are we going to require drug testing? I mean, are we going to require drug testing of all the other programs that we have at USDA? I mean, it's a situation of equity. I mean, we're not quite sure what the relationship is, and we're not sure what the problem is we're trying to solve here.
All right.
So, well, go ahead.
I understand there is a difference in the interpretation of the term welfare as defined by the President Clinton's 96 Welfare Reform Act. Does the term welfare apply to SNAP?
We don't see it this way, and that's why we're contesting, why we're engaged in litigation in Wisconsin over this very issue. We think the state is not correct in its interpretation of our law. Mr. Chairman, I would like to provide you a more detailed, more legalistic answer to your question because it's a serious one. And I want to make sure that I provide you the right answer, but from my own legal experience, I'm convinced we have a very, very strong legal position in terms of our definition and our interpretation of the terms, and that our nutrition assistance programs, they're just not the same as cash welfare. They're just fundamentally different.
Well, I understand the TANF program has a drug testing component, and that states have the option of implementing that. And I'm wondering if you or the staff at Food and Nutrition Services have looked at the TANF program to see if there's something that might be beneficial within the SNAP program, since there's some interaction between the two programs.
Well, what we have looked at, maybe the underlying part of your question, is whether or not we continue to look at the integrity and the use of these benefits for the purpose for which they're intended. And the answer to that question is absolutely. We continue to look for ways in which we can improve the integrity of the program. The integrity and error rates of this program are lower than they were when I became secretary, and we're continuing to have individual investigations. We're continuing to have investigations of grocery stores and convenience stores where there may be potential fraud. We're data mining, we're analyzing information, we're increasing the number of inspectors, we're asking states to do a better job. I think last year we had 640,000 reviews and investigations of individuals to make sure that they are using these benefits properly, that they're not using them for some inappropriate purpose. Tens of thousands have been disqualified. We've done the same thing with convenience stores and grocery stores, and hundreds of those have been disqualified from ever participating in the program.
Well, the bottom line, we're looking at, is there a model that can help those that are found to have a drug abuse problem get the help they need, and which obviously is going to be better for their families and society as a whole. So is there a model out there that can help these folks?
Well, I can only speak on this issue in light of what I've said to Chairman Rogers. When the lack of services in rural America for substance abuse and mental health, when 76% of the shortage areas are located in rural areas, I would say the first line of defense, Mr. Chairman, would be to adequately fund mental health and substance abuse services in rural America. It wouldn't necessarily be imposing a drug test that would be randomly proposed. I just don't think that's not going to solve the problem that you're addressing.
Well, I understand that there may need to be some help in that regard to try to make sure those programs are funded, but at the same time, I think turning a blind eye, and I think it would be helpful if the drug abusers are identified, get them the help they need, this is something that I think we need to look more closely at. So thank you for your comments. Mr. Farr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you, Mr. Secretary, for helping us, at least standing on the same side of a very controversial issue within our committee, which is the continuing the language to ban the inspection of horses for human food. It's been a debate in this committee year after year. The amendment that I carried last year tied, so it failed, and yet the omnibus bill with Senate help included it, and I strongly support this language, and I'm pleased to see that the administration requested it again this year. I was just interested on your views on continuing this language. I also have some other questions. It's not my only one.
There are many things about this job that I love and that I will miss when I no longer have it. Talking about horse slaughter is not one of them. This is a tough issue, to be candid. I think I understand and appreciate the ban. I would say that we need to address the fundamental problem, which is that we've got a lot of wild horses out there that we need to figure something else out other than slaughter, because they do create some serious challenges for us, particularly on public lands and particularly private lands. And I don't know that we've necessarily been serious about that piece of the problem. And so my suggestion and advice would be instead of talking about and debating horse slaughter, we ought to be figuring out what do we do with these horses that wouldn't necessarily be inhumane, that would be appropriate. We just
I'm
don't
not just talking about wild horses, but also, what do we call it? Private horses. those wild horses are owned by the government, but there's also a lot of the people who want to just get money for their old gray mare, but not necessarily old gray mare. It could be race horses. It could be all kinds of horses. But I think we ought to continue the ban, and I know you've supported that, and it's, I agree with you on the wild horses. Let me switch to, and I hope that we can get some support this year if it's controversial again in committee. I just, could you just look into something for me? I've been supporting the rural mariculture, the agriculture, the aquaculture people, and particularly the marine mariculture. And the organic rule has been stuck in OMB for a long time, and people are just champing at the bit to get it out there in circulation. And I don't know what the hell it's in OMB. So could you push to get it out of there and get it out to the rulemaking review process?
My staff knows that that's on the list of things to get done.
Well, let's get it done. Let's get it out of there as soon as possible.
It's on the list along with your lab in Salinas.
Well, there's lots of them. The specialty crop issue is also concerned is about the $12 million cut from last year's level. And the two concerns that were raised to me in California are the light brown apple moth. Hope that you will keep that at level funding. And one that I think you ought to be bragging about, particularly in light of what other members have brought up today, is the successful program in the European grape moth eradication. We're not there yet, but you know, that was devastating Northern California and all the wine grape folks. And we've only found one moth in 1915. So we need to keep monitoring and trapping and everything, and we hope that that program won't be reduced, because we have to go from, you know, being cleared. It hasn't been cleared yet that we're safe, but it's also an incredible story of how you attacked an invasive species, and with the collaboration of all the counties and all the growers, and it was quite a war on insect. That seems to me that it's been relatively successful. So we want to make sure we don't lose any of the money to get it totally eradicated.
We'll continue to work with the California Department of Agriculture on the light brown apple moth, and the good news is that there are a number of items for export that we have sort of said that's no longer an issue and no longer a problem. We recently announced several of those. We'll get that list to you, Representative.
And the European grape.
Yes.
Dr. Harris.
Thank you very much. And you're right, he agreed with you. Let me just ask, let me just follow up a little bit with the chairman's questions about the SNAP and drug testing. And, you know, I'd hope that, for instance, if a state wanted to initiate a program, because, you know, in my rural areas, as you've, you know, conversed with the chairman, heroin abuse, drug abuse is a huge problem. And I would hope that we look for ways to identify individuals in the community who choose not to seek help, because, as you testified, you know, those people who are independently minded, they may not go to seek, even if it's available, they may not feel that they're going to go and seek help, and we should look ways to reach out. So if a state wanted to, for instance, institute a program where it tested beneficiaries and referred them and made that a requirement that you actually get referral and treatment to treat these individuals, I would hope the department would be supportive of that. Let me move on to one thing that's new, I know, in your wheelhouse, which is the catfish inspections. And if you didn't like horse slaughter, you're not going to like this either, I guess. You know, and again, you know, and again, particular to my district, you know, I had a blue catfish farmer, not farmer, I shouldn't say, he does wild caught in the Chesapeake Bay. And the blue cats, which are non-native species, are a huge problem in the bay. Biomass of these, by the way, which eat rockfish, which eat crabs, is 8 times the rockfish biomass in the bay and growing. And he's afraid, and I'm afraid, that if we don't institute this in a way that, or if we do institute these regulations in a way that impede my blue catfish wild-caught watermen, then we are going to do damage to the Chesapeake Bay. We have to control this species, and the way to control it really is you fish them. And you fish them until we'll never eliminate them, but you have to control them with fishing. And he's very worried about that. So I just bring that concern to you that yeah, I understand the whole food fight between, no pun intended, between our, southern farmers for catfish and, and imports, but caught up in this are this non-native species, the blue catfish in the Chesapeake Bay, as well as the channel catfish, was also non-native in this. Now, and finally, and I'll just close and just add that, and I'm going to ask a question, maybe your staff knows this or not, but your program level for direct loans for water and waste disposal was $1.2 billion, and you proposed to decrease it by 33%. Now, is that because you have no backlog for these loans?
No, it's because we are working with the private sector to engage them in dealing with this issue, and we're actually seeing quite a bit of interest in pension plans and private capital markets to invest in these projects.
Right. But until then, my concern is, again, I have small rural communities which depend on these loans for their upgrades, because again, I live on the bay. You know the rules, and USDA is caught up in this as well. This argument about who's going to control the pollution into the Chesapeake Bay. It's going to be the agriculture community, or are we going to look to the small waste treatment plants that need to be upgraded, go from BNR to ENR, and these all cost money. These small communities, as you know, don't have the money. They depend on this program. So I'm puzzled. I was a little disappointed to see this 33% decrease. If there is no absence, unless you have no backlog.
No, there's a $10 billion commitment from the Farm Credit Association to work with us in collaboration. So we're going to be able to leverage those resources more effectively. There's a tremendous need out there. There's no question about that.
Thank you very much, and thank you for recognizing
on
that.
The FSIS issue, wild-caught fish destined for human consumption is going to be inspected. And we'll work with any stakeholders that you have if they need information or want to know what the rules are. I'd be happy to.
Thank you very, very much. I appreciate that. And I yield back.
Ms. Pingree.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you again for all your answers today and just the work that you've been doing. I want to ask you a few questions about economic opportunities at the Department of Agriculture. While I understand you have an extremely diverse mission, and it's amazing sometimes to hear the entire line of questioning from rural electric development to nutrition programs, and I sometimes get concerned when we try to add more social missions onto the organization. I would be very concerned if we added drug testing and thought that was a vehicle for SNAP recipients to get more care, because just as you mentioned, I represent a very rural state. There's not enough treatment out there already. We know a lot of people who need that treatment, and one of our issues is not trying to find more of those people. It's how we help people out in a state like mine. But what I want to talk about, I think, is, in my opinion, one of the core missions of your organization, and that is how we enhance the economic opportunities for farmers in rural areas. And it's been really great to watch over the 8 years. I think you have been a part of this transition into opportunities for farmers that weren't there before in new markets. You've mentioned many times today local and regional food systems, and how that's even been an asset for some of the traditional farmers you mentioned earlier who are struggling economically. This is one of the places where people have found growth. And I want to talk about how we can do more of that. I'm just going to throw out a 2 or 3 concerns I have, and then I'll let you go at it so I don't have to keep asking the question. One of them that is kind of a thorn in my side is about organic research. Now, I come from one of those states where we've seen some of the greatest opportunities for agriculture resurgence because of the markets in organic farming. We've added the most organic farmers in our state than any other state between 2008 and 2014. It has been a great opportunity for us. But as you know, in spite of the huge growth in this market, there is a shortage of many things. And whether it's corn or wheat or dairy products, not enough is out there. And I think for a lot of farmers who want to make that transition, there hasn't been sufficient research in methodologies and how to go about doing it. So one of my issues, and I'm thrilled to see that the President's budget requests $700 million for the Agriculture and Food Research Initiative, AFRI. By my calculation, less than 1% of AFRI funding went to organic projects in 2014. So I want to hear a little bit about, if you do receive some of that funding, what are you doing to enhance that research opportunity, which I see as a direct economic benefit to farmers around the country, not just our state? And what else could you be doing besides AFRI to better serve organic farmers. And I want to throw something in there. I know one of your goals has been around lowering the age of our farmers. That's a big challenge that you've talked about, and certainly how we enhance beginning and new farmers. Again, I'm one of the people, I represent the oldest state in the nation, but the number of young farmers in our state, aged 34 and younger, grew by 40%. In the last decade. So we see these great opportunities, and one of the challenges that we're seeing is what's happening in many states is that they get started, but when it comes to scaling up, there are big challenges. You can start as a small farm, maybe you sell out the back door, you go to a farmer's market, but then when you want to get into wholesale or other markets, those are some of the challenges. So I want to hear if there are any ways that you think the Beginning Farmer and Rancher Development Program could be used to help mid-sized farmers scale up, or are there other USDA programs that could help with that initiative? And just to throw one last thing in there, because I'm going to run out of time, we're very grateful for value-added producer grants. And one of the challenges that our farmers have is around the notice of funding availability. That should have been out in December or January. It is already February. We don't have that yet. And again, for farmers who need 2 or 3 months to complete these grants, which can be enormously beneficial in changing their opportunities, could you get it in a routine so it always came on time? I've given you almost no time to answer, but I know you can do it quickly.
Organic research, there's a specific organic research initiative in the Farm Bill, over $100 million. We're in the process of putting that resource out over a period of time. Organic does represent roughly 1% of the land mass of the U.S. It's roughly 20,000 and growing certified operators. One of the challenges, of course, is transitioning land from conventional farming to organic farming. There's that requirement that you transition. I think if there's future focus, it should be on trying to figure out ways in which we can assist that transition period. There really isn't much in the form of assistance in that respect. There are a couple of, you got a CRP transition program that helps beginning farmers get involved, but there's very little in that space, and that's one place I would say. We have helped in expanding risk management tools. We've developed a price selection option for 70 organic crops. We have provided contract provisions and risk management for organic crops. We have created the research initiative. We have created the microloan program, which can transition into our long-term operating and ownership loan programs, because we give the farmer the ability to create the experience that will allow them to qualify for the larger loans. We have worked on expanding growing seasons with high tunnel houses, over 15,000 of those. We've looked for ways in which we can expand market opportunities through food hubs, farmers markets, and we've also had equivalency agreements with South Korea, Japan, EU, Canada, and Mexico. We're working on one with Mexico. So we are really engaged in this space, and we'll continue to look for ways to provide help and assistance. But we've tried to focus this on a holistic, comprehensive approach. Sorry, Mr. Chairman.
I know I'm out of time, but how about the notice of funding availability on value-added producer grants?
I'll check on that. I don't know what this.
Yeah, I'm sure your office can update us on that. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, avian influenza. I mean, you saw what happened, not just in Iowa, throughout the Midwest, parts of the West. Largest outbreak in the history of the United States, harming our livestock. We don't have crystal balls out there to know when these things come along and the timing of things, but we have to respond quickly with a vaccine. Just wonder how that process is doing with the outbreak over. Although we have seen some things happening right now in Indiana, as you know, with turkeys. The HPA1AI vaccine appears to be strain specific. And Indiana's been hit with the H7 strain. Would the vaccine created for the H5 strain work against the H7 strain? Do you know? Do we know?
I don't know the answer to that question. I know that we've been working with Harris Vaccine and Ames and another vaccine company to stockpile the appropriate vaccine. But I will tell you, Congressman, the fact that we have it doesn't necessarily mean that we'll use it, because, as you know, it's quite controversial. There's a split within the industry about whether or not it's appropriate to use and the impact it will have in terms of messaging to our trading partners. The concern is that that may be misinterpreted, that it represents a problem with the entire industry as opposed to a particular flock. And we're working to try to get people educated and trying to work through international organizations so that if and when that is ever used, the vaccine is used, it doesn't have a very devastating impact on trade.
How long does it take to develop a new strain? I guess it depends on the strain and
It
the
depends.
trial and error.
You know, I think the folks did a pretty amazing job under the circumstances. Once this thing cropped up, within a matter of months, there was a direction, and within a matter of 6 months or so, we had something that we could conditionally license. So I think, I think the industry and our ARS facilities operate pretty well in this space. But the problem with this is it mutates.
Yeah.
And we saw in Indiana, for example, a different mutation.
And it could go to different species as well.
It can, and that's part of a challenge of one of the reasons why we think it's important to continue to ramp up research dollars.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate out of the 4 priorities, the research dollars are very important. So I appreciate that. Pork inspection. Pork producers, they've been very supportive of the Food Safety and Inspection Service effort to modernize pork inspections, seeing it as a way for efficiencies, effectiveness, rapid adoption. We have heard some concerns, and you have heard some concerns by members of Congress about the administration's pork inspection modernization efforts, specifically about the model's ability, or inability maybe, to address food safety, animal welfare, and worker safety. Could you take a moment to share your views about USDA's hazard analysis and critical control point HACCP-based inspection models concerning pork production?
The initial evaluation of the hemp plant for pork suggested that there was no significant variation in food safety relative to other facilities using a different inspection system. We are doing a more in-depth evaluation and analysis so that we can respond to questions and concerns. As you know, that process has been implemented and is being implemented in poultry facilities. I think there are 52 facilities today that are now using it. We're going to continue that evaluation, and assuming that there's not an indication of significant problems, then it will be something that we will obviously work on and provide, because we think the preliminary information would suggest it's not going to increase risk.
So that's somewhat encouraging at this point. Okay. Thank you for being here.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. I understand you have to be out of here by 1, so what I thought we'd do is just, I've got one more question, and maybe Mr. Forrest got one question, and we'll wrap up, and we'll call it a day from the hearing standpoint. I wanted to ask you about rental assistance. It's a troubling topic last year when there were large-scale premature exhaustion of rental assistance funds. Congress fully funded the Department's FY15 budget request and provided certain authorities the President's budget requested for rural assistance program. These should have provided the Department the mechanisms needed to effectively manage and operate the programs to provide assistance to those who are eligible and that were in need of it most. But that happened to not be the case. Rural assistance funds were quickly exhausted, and the requested policies, and when implemented, proved short-sighted as to the real impact to property owners and tenants. Department should have been aware of the forthcoming shortfall well in advance. However, the Department failed to communicate this issue with Congress or the property owners until the last possible day, and it caused a lot of uncertainty, confusion, and frustration among all those that were associated with it. As you're aware, the FY16 Omnibus provided full funding for the rental assistance program, including shortfalls for FY15. How's the Department monitoring expenses and projected expenses for the rental assistance program to ensure that there'll not be a shortfall in FY16 so that Congress doesn't have to step in again at the last moment to try to save the program?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'm remiss in not acknowledging and thanking you and the committee for, in the omnibus, adequately funding the rental assistance accounts. We're confident that that's not going to create the problems that we've experienced the last couple of years. We did point out, and will continue to point out, the concerns that we've expressed to you, which is that over time, a lot of these units are going to basically have their mortgages satisfied. They're going to ultimately get out of the program, perhaps as many as 75% of them in the next decade or so. That's going to create a significant set of issues relative to the availability of rental and affordable housing in rural areas. We're in the process now of trying to deal with this in terms of extending mortgages, of basically refinancing these loans, extending them, in an effort to try to reduce the challenge that that's going to create. But it's an issue that's coming down the pike and needs to be addressed in some way.
Is the what about, or how are you preparing for the significant number of properties that have mortgages that are going to be maturing in the coming years?
We're basically trying to, number one, educating people about the problem that's going to occur. Number two, looking at ways in which we could potentially restructure that debt, reduce payments, take the reduced payments and put them into rehabbing and improving the properties, and then thereby extending the length of the mortgage, which will obviously keep it in the program. We're proposing and suggesting that if one way of dealing with this would be to create some voucher protection for those folks who do lose the affordable unit because the mortgage is paid off, and the folks decide to raise rents. That's in the budget proposal. So that's something you could consider, extending the voucher program that you currently have.
Well, thanks for your concern on that, because that certainly is something that I know that has been a problem in the past, and we certainly want to make sure that we're avoided in the future. So with that, let me conclude with Mr. Farr.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Well, Mr. Secretary, 8 years. 8 years ago, you were a candidate for President of the United States, and also, although you were unsuccessful in being nominated and elected, you've been incredibly successful at being head of one of the most important and expansive programs in America, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, with all your overseas operations, all your research, all your rural economic development, all your poverty programs, commodity programs. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And what an incredible agency to be head of. So it's the last day of you'll be in front of this committee like this, and I'd like to just, what are your lessons learned? It don't have to be restricted just to being Secretary of Agriculture, but you've been in government a long time in your career life, and I'm leaving with you, and so I'd just like to know, I'm always trying to reflect on looking back and what did I learn and what can I pass on to the next generation. You got any words of wisdom?
Well, let me return the compliment, Representative. I have an extraordinary amount of appreciation and respect for every member of this committee, but I've had a chance to work with you personally, and I know how deeply committed you are to people, particularly those who are struggling. And you've had an impact on me, and you've had an impact on the department through your advocacy and your passion. And I will tell you that regardless of who takes your spot in Congress, this body will miss you and miss your voice. But many lessons, starting with what an incredible department it is. It is an underappreciated department, not in this committee, but in this town. I don't think there's if I had $1 for every time someone said to me in this town, I didn't know USDA did that, I would be able to retire and not have to look for work after this job. When the issue was raised about mental health and HHS was going to do some mental health funding, I raised my hand at a meeting and said, well, gee, our community facility program could potentially be helpful there. And it turns out that we actually did quite a few mental health clinics in rural areas. Nobody knew we did that. A lot of people don't know we do the housing programs. A lot of people don't know that we are involved in business development. So that's number one. And I think it's in order for this department to be adequately funded in the big scheme of things, when you're going up against the Defense Department and some of the other larger departments, it's going to be incumbent on all of us to continue to message the importance of this particular department and the work it does. And that means that we have to message the importance of rural America. And that is a message and that is a lesson that I have also learned over the course of 26 years of public service. It's an incredible place, and it doesn't get the credit it deserves. It is the place where most of our food comes from. It is the place where a lot of the water that we drink is impacted. It is the place where virtually every bit of energy feedstock comes from, whether it's coal or whether it's the solar panels or whether it's wind turbines, or almost all of them are located in rural areas. It's the place where a disproportionate number of folks who serve in the military come from, and people always say, when I make that statistic, they say, well, that's, people are looking for a way out. I say, no, that's not the issue. What this says is about the value system of rural America. The fact that people who are raised on farms and ranches understand that the land gives to us, and we're required to give something back to it. And that value system of giving back to something that's valuable is just in the bones of the people who are raised in rural areas. And so when they look at this country and this country gives them extraordinary opportunities, they say, hey, I got a responsibility to give something back. So it is important, these programs that we're talking about, whether it's rental assistance or business development or whatever it is, it's important for rural America to get the respect it deserves. And that's been a frustration of mine in terms of this job, is that it's really, really hard to crack sort of the media of today, which is all about glitz and glitter. And this place, rural America, it's about the heart and soul of this country. And it doesn't get the credit it deserves. And these hearings give me and you and us the opportunity to focus the attention for just a brief moment. I just respect anybody who's on this committee because you understand this. And then the last thing I would say, I mean, there's lots of things I've learned, is that it breaks my heart that we have this conflict within agriculture, that there are various ways of growing things and raising things, and that for whatever reason we don't speak with a single voice about the greatness of American agriculture. People say, well, do you favor organic? Do you favor GMOs? Do you favor this? And I say, look, it's like asking me which of my two sons I love the most. I love them both. Here's what agriculture does, and I'll finish with this. Every one of us that's not a farmer is not a farmer because we have farmers. We've delegated the responsibility of feeding our families to a relatively small percentage of this country. If you look at 85% of what's grown in this country, it's raised by 200,000 to 300,000 people. That's less than 1/10 of 1% of America. But the other 99% of us can be lawyers and doctors and Peace Corps volunteers and economists and people that work for government and all of the other occupations. Because we never think about, well, geez, do I have to actually grow the food for my family? No, I go to the grocery store and get it. So I'm free to do whatever I want to do with my life. That is an incredible freedom that we take for granted in this country. It is not true in most of the countries in this world. And then when we go to the grocery store, we walk out of it with more money in our pocket as a percentage of our paychecks than anybody else in the world. So we have this incredible economy that's consumer-oriented that allows us to buy stuff. It's unbelievable. And rather than being criticized and criticized and demonized at times, we ought to be celebrating these people, in my view. And we don't do it enough of it. So, thanks for the question.
Well, thank you. Thank you for your comments, especially your comments about rural America, and someone who represents a part of rural America out there. I totally understand what you're saying and agree, and thank you for your comments about rural America in general. So thank you for that. Everybody said this is about your last time in here. Maybe we'll just have you back just so we can come back and have you to come back and address the committee. So anyway, thank you again for your service. We look forward to working with you as we continue on working through this process for the fiscal year.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.